Lantz and Whitefeather kept motion-activated Arlo cameras on the children, one in the shed on the 14-year-old boy and 16-year-old girl, and one in a room upstairs with no bed, only a tarp floor that stayed on the 9-year-old girl and 11-year-old boy. The video showed a daily routine of waking up early and being forced to stand with hands on head, unable to change or shower, receiving only peanut butter sandwiches to eat before going back to bed on the floor. In the shed, the teens used a camper toilet, holding a sheet up for each other to shield the other from the camera. Lieutenant Pyle said she first began hearing about this in August before the shed discovery, but testified could never quite get a hold of a CPS worker to follow up.
In the quiet town of Sissonville, West Virginia, a disturbing case unfolded in 2023, revealing the severe mistreatment of 5 adopted black children by a white couple, Donald Ray Lantz and Jeanne K. White. This story delves into the harrowing details of their ordeal, examining the implications of such acts in the broader context of racial injustice and the ongoing debate over reparations for black Americans. The case unveiled that Donald Ray Lantz, 63, and Jeanne K. Whitefeather, 62, were arrested following concerns raised by neighbors about the welfare of children at their property. On a fateful day in October 2023, deputies discovered 2 teenagers locked in a shed with no means of exit, alongside a 9-year-old girl crying alone in a loft within the main house. The children, all siblings adopted by Lantz and Whitefeather, were subjected to conditions reminiscent of slavery. As for the living conditions, the children were found in a shed described as a teenage hangout by the defense, but in reality, it was equipped with only basic amenities like a camping toilet and no running water. The structure was more akin to a barn or shed than a livable space for children. In addition, there was forced labor, according to court documents. The children were allegedly forced to perform labor, including heavy lifting and farm work, under the threat of punishment. They were made to stand for long periods, sometimes with their hands over their heads, and were subjected to punitive measures like pepper spraying. According to officials, the children also suffered emotional and physical abuse. Reports indicate the use of derogatory racial slurs, physical beatings with objects like PVC pipes, and psychological manipulation. Text messages from Whitefeather's phone showed plans to manage the children's behavior through harsh methods. The couple faced a trial in January 2025, charged with human trafficking, child abuse, forced labor, and civil rights violations. The defense claimed that the couple was overwhelmed by the children's trauma and mental health issues, suggesting their actions were misguided attempts at control rather than overt racism. However, the prosecution argued that the treatment was racially motivated, pointing to the stark racial contrast between the adoptive parents and children.
The jury saw days of video the Arlo cameras saved, including the moments deputies busted in the door on the shed on October 2nd.
You're okay. You're not in trouble. You're okay.
The children were turned over to Child Protective Services, and when Lantz and Whitefeather got back with 2 of the children that night, they were later arrested. But that was just the beginning of their charges and the investigation. On Friday, the jury got an inside look at Whitefeather's cell phone. This included text messages between she and Lantz where they referred to the kids as monkeys and pigs. Often Lantz would describe physical punishment, where he said he, quote, knocked one of them. We saw one text where Lantz said, quote, somebody didn't say thank you, and his sandwiches disappeared. We also saw more video from Whitefeather's phone from their time in Washington that also showed yelling and physical abuse from Lantz.
Public discourse on social media and news platforms highlighted the case as a modern manifestation of slavery, with posts describing the situation as deplorable and using the term slaves to describe the children's roles. The narrative resonated with advocates for reparations, who saw this case as a stark example of systemic racism persisting into modern times. The mistreatment of these children by Lantz and Whitefeather serves as a chilling reminder of the historical abuses faced by black Americans. Advocates for reparations argue the exploitation of black children in this case mirrors the long history of forced labor and dehumanization that black Americans have endured, from slavery to Jim Crow laws and beyond. This case underscores the need for systemic change, where reparations could address not only historical injustices, but also contemporary ones, ensuring that such abuses are not just condemned, but also compensated for in a manner that acknowledges the deep-seated racial trauma.
Finance expert from the West Virginia Fusion Center, Alyssa Ledbetter, also took the stand on Friday. She broke down the adoption payments Whitefeather and Lantz received from Minnesota. She said in total of what they analyzed from 2019 to 2023, the two received about $318,000 in adoption support payments, but she testified this didn't tell the whole story. All of this leading up to the most harrowing testimony so far on Friday afternoon from someone who lived it. We were not allowed to film or record the victims who will testify in this case, but were in the room as the teen girl, now 18, but 16 at the time, shared what her life was like both in Washington State and in Sissonville. She said life progressively got worse with Whitefeather and Lantz once they moved to the ranch in Washington in 2019. This is when the outdoor labor began, she said, and the physical punishments that included hits from a PVC pipe. While under a child services investigation there in Washington, eventually they moved to Sissonville, but she did not know why. She talked about how CBS was called soon after they arrived in West Virginia, and she detailed a visit from a worker who stayed on the porch and talked to them through the screen door. The teen testified she was not honest with CPS because Lantz could hear her from where she was standing. Eventually, she and her teen brother, who has several mental health disorders, were locked in a shed in August of 2023. She said she went without a shower for 2 months and never changed clothes. She went from sleeping on a mattress to the floor with a sleeping bag. Her brother slept on the concrete floor with only cardboard at his head. She said she was forced to be his babysitter, but testified he was never the dangerous, violent kid that Lantz and Whitefeather made him out to be. She recalled the use of physical violence, pepper spray, and racial slurs from Lantz and Whitefeather. She recalled also being scared when police arrived at the shed, worried that she would say something to upset Whitefeather. Some of her more emotional moments came during cross-examination by Whitefeather's attorney, Mark Lantz. At one point, he referred to Whitefeather as her mother, and she quickly corrected him. He questioned why some of her interviews before this contradicted what she said on the stand, but when Tuck asked her why she felt comfortable telling the truth now, she said, "Because I know I won't have to go back to that."
Beyond financial reparations, there's a call for systemic changes in child welfare, adoption processes, and societal attitudes toward race to prevent similar occurrences, emphasizing education on racial sensitivity and the history of racial oppression in America. The case of Donald Ray Lantz and Jeanne Whitefeather is not merely a story of individual cruelty, but a stark illustration of racial dynamics in America that have yet to be fully addressed. It amplifies the argument for reparations as an essential step toward healing injustice, highlighting that the vestiges of slavery can still manifest in the 21st century. As this story concludes, the trial's outcome and the societal response it provoked remind us of the persistent need to confront and dismantle the structures of racial inequality.